She recognized him before he played a single note. Mira Halloran had walked into the Bellamy Hotel's Ardmore Lounge expecting nothing: a free dinner, a deadline favor, an easy column on background piano in a fading uptown hotel. 300 words by Monday, her editor had said, with the kind of sigh that meant nobody important would read it. So she ordered a club soda at table 9, opened her notebook, and looked up at the man at the half-lit baby grand by the velvet curtain. His back was to her, grey at the temples, a black jacket worn shiny at the elbows. The room was nearly empty: 2 couples, a businessman scrolling his phone, a bartender polishing the same glass for the 3rd time. Then the pianist turned his head to nod at the waiter, and Mira's pen stopped above the page. She knew that face. She knew it the way a child knows a photograph kept on a piano her whole life, the photograph her father had pointed to 1,000 times, his hand shaking with reverence, saying, That is the cleanest Rachmaninoff anyone alive ever played. She closed her notebook. The pianist's name in the binder by the host station read simply, House Pianist Mr. Vance. But Mira had grown up with a different name on her father's wall, on the worn record sleeve in their living room, on the program from the night her father had driven 3 states to hear a young Russian-trained prodigy play the 3rd concerto with the National Symphony at 23. The boy on that program had been called Daniel Vance Holloway. The reviews had used the word divine. 2 years later, the reviews had used the word disaster. She remembered the rest in pieces, the way her father had told it. A career exploding too fast. A father who pushed too hard. A breakdown at the Royal Albert. A vanishing. Nothing for 32 years. And now he was here, in a hotel lounge, playing a soft, harmless arrangement of Smile for an audience of 4. Mira's throat closed around her ice cube. She did not write that down. She watched. He played the next 3 pieces the way the room expected: pleasant, undemanding. The keys touched lightly enough that a businessman could keep typing through them. Autumn Leaves, a slow, jazz-bent Misty, a waltz so quiet it was almost an apology. But Mira's ear, trained at conservatory before she had given up performing for criticism, heard the secret underneath. Even when he played down, his voicing was impossible. The inner voices in his left hand moved with the precision of a Bach fugue. He was hiding, and he was hiding magnificently. She had read his last review once. She had been 12. Her father had handed her the yellowed paper without speaking. The critic had used the phrase, a meteor disintegrating in front of us. She remembered crying without understanding why. She watched him now, between pieces, the way a columnist watches anyone she might write about for the tell, for the gesture nobody else would notice. He did not look at the room. He did not look at the bartender. Between pieces, he laid both hands flat on his thighs and held them there for one full breath, the way certain old surgeons did before the next incision. The cuff of his left sleeve was frayed at the buttonhole. His shoes were polished. The collar of his shirt was the kind of shirt a man irons himself, in a kitchen, late at night, alone. Mira had grown up with a father who ironed his own shirts. She knew the geometry of those collars. She felt, then, a private, useless tenderness that she would not allow herself to put in a column. The set ended. Vance or Holloway bowed to no applause because no one was listening and stepped down toward the small bar to drink a glass of water. He moved like a man who had practiced being unseen. Mira pushed her chair back and crossed to him before her courage could fail. Mr. Holloway, she said, quietly enough that no one else could hear. He did not flinch. He drank his water slowly and set the glass down. When he turned to her, his eyes were grey and tired and not surprised at all. It's Vance now, he said. My father drove from Pittsburgh to hear you play Rachmaninoff 3 at the Kennedy Center, Mira said. The words tumbled out before she could shape them. He kept the program in a frame. He played your recording every Sunday morning of my childhood. He died 2 years ago. He still believed you were the greatest of his generation. Daniel Holloway looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not pleasure, not pain, something older than both. Then your father was kind, he said. He was honest. A small, broken smile crossed his mouth and was gone. I have one more set, he said. 40 minutes. Then I go home. I don't give interviews, miss. Halloran. Mira Halloran. I write for the Bellwether. Then I especially don't give interviews. I'm not asking for one. What are you asking for? She had no good answer, so she gave him the only honest one she had. I want to know what you play when no one is listening. He held her gaze. Behind him, the bartender was wiping down the espresso machine. The businessman had paid his check. The 2 couples had drifted out toward the elevators. The lounge was nearly empty now. Mira, the bartender, a waiter folding napkins, and an elderly woman in pearls at the corner banquette who had been there since Mira arrived. Holloway looked at the piano, then at the room, then back at her. "Sit," he said, "at your table. Don't write anything down." She nodded and sat. He walked back to the baby grand and adjusted the bench by an inch. He set his water glass on the floor where the pedal mechanism would not strike it. He took off his jacket, folded it, and laid it across the top of the instrument. He sat. He raised his hands above the keys, and for a moment he did not bring them down. Mira felt every second. The first note he played was so soft she almost missed it. A single low D, struck once, allowed to bloom and decay into the carpet, then a chord, the kind of chord that opened a door inside a room. She recognized it before her mind named it. The Rachmaninoff, the second concerto, the opening without the orchestra. He played the bell-like crescendo of the introduction alone, his left hand carrying the deep tolling, his right hand laying in the harmonies, and the whole instrument changed beneath him. The Ardmore's house piano, a serviceable Yamaha, untouched by tuning for at least a month, suddenly stopped sounding serviceable. It sounded like something a man had spent a life teaching to speak. By the time he reached the main theme, the bartender had stopped wiping. The waiter had stopped folding. The elderly woman in pearls had set down her drink with a small audible click. Mira's hands were over her mouth. There was no orchestra, there was no audience, there were no critics, no fathers, no managers, no recording engineers. There was a man and a piano in a half-lit hotel lounge at 11 at night, and there was the Rachmaninoff second exactly the way it had been written and exactly the way her father had heard it in 1992, and the piece had not aged a single day. He took it from the beginning straight into the first movement proper. He played the long singing melody as if he had a string section in his fingers. He played the development as if he were arguing with the dead. When he reached the cadenza-like figurations, the runs that had broken him at the Royal Albert 32 years ago, his hands did not falter. They moved like water finding its old bed. His thumb crossed under his third finger so cleanly it made no sound at all against the wood, and the ribs of the old Yamaha picked up the resonance and gave it back doubled. Mira could see the small muscle along the side of his right hand working under the skin, the wrist staying loose, the elbow held away from his body the way the Russians had taught him 50 years ago. His left foot worked the soft pedal with the precision of a man tuning a radio dial, releasing it on the half beat to let a single inner voice come forward and then catching it again before the chord could blur. Mira had been to Carnegie Hall 4 times. She had never watched a pianist breathe so slowly. The bartender came out from behind the bar slowly, holding his polishing cloth in one hand, and walked to the edge of the lounge and stopped. The waiter set the napkins down without folding the last one. The elderly woman in pearls stood up, not for an ovation, there was no ovation yet, but because she could not stay seated. A bellman appeared in the doorway. Then a housekeeper from the back hall, drawn by the sound travelling through the service corridor. Then the hotel's night manager. None of them spoke, none of them sat. They stood in the doorways and at the edges of the carpet, and they listened. Mira watched Daniel Holloway disappear into his own, playing the way a swimmer disappears into deep water. He moved into the second movement without pause, the slow movement, the one her father had played on Sunday mornings while making pancakes for a daughter too small to understand what she was hearing. The adagio, the held breath. The melody that walked up the staircase and stopped on the landing as if it had remembered something. He shaped it so carefully that Mira understood, for the first time in her adult life, what her father had meant when he said certain pianists do not play notes, they play time. He weighted each finger differently, the fourth lighter than the fifth, the thumb almost withheld so the melody floated a hair above the accompaniment, as if the song and the singer were two different people in the same body. His right shoulder dropped a quarter inch when the phrase opened, and rose again at the cadence, breathing for the line the way a wind player breathes for a reed. Mira watched the half pedal come up, slow as a tide going out, and the upper harmonics hung on in the wood of the lid above his head. The instrument was 40 years old and forgotten. Tonight it sounded 40 years old and remembered. The third movement broke open like a door kicked off its hinges. The allegro scherzando fast, gleaming, dangerous. He took it at the tempo of his youth. He did not soften it for an aging man's hands. He did not hedge a single phrase. The runs rolled and the chords landed and the cross rhythms locked into place, and Mira realized she was crying without sound. Somewhere in the middle of the finale, the night manager, a tall woman in her 50s with a key card on a lanyard, quietly pulled out her phone and began to record, holding it low against her chest so as not to break the spell. A second housekeeper had joined the first in the service doorway. A guest in a hotel robe and slippers stood frozen at the elevator bank, his keycard forgotten in his hand. Mira saw, across the lobby glass, two doormen leaning against the brass railing as if the music had reached them through the revolving door. Nobody crossed the carpet. Nobody coughed. The Ardmore Lounge, which had hosted 3 decades of conventions and rehearsal dinners and forgotten last drinks, had become, for this one stretch of minutes, the only room in the city worth being in. When the final chords came, the great hammered C major chords that the orchestra usually thunders home, Daniel Holloway played them alone on a hotel lounge piano with 2 pedals he could trust and 1 he had to nurse, and the room rang with them as if the room itself had become an instrument. He let the last chord die. He did not lift his hands immediately. He kept them resting on the keys, palms down, eyes closed, like a man checking whether something he had lost was still there. Then he lowered them to his lap. For 3 full seconds, the lounge held its silence. Then the elderly woman in pearls began to clap. The bartender followed. Then the waiter, both bellmen, the housekeeper, the night manager. The applause was not the applause of a great hall. 12 people cannot make that sound. But it was the cleanest, most awake applause Mira had ever heard in her life. Every pair of hands meant it. The night manager wiped her face on her sleeve. Daniel Holloway stood. He did not smile. He did not bow theatrically. He inclined his head a small, formal nod to the elderly woman, to the bartender, to the staff. Then he looked across the empty tables and inclined his head to Mira. She bowed her own head in return. He walked back to the bar, picked up his water glass, drank the rest of it in one long swallow, and set the glass down quietly. "I think," he said to the bartender, "I will not finish the set tonight." The bartender, still holding the cloth, swallowed and said, "Sir, you can take the rest of the week off if you want." Holloway smiled, really smiled, this time a small private smile that climbed all the way to his eyes. "Tomorrow at 7, he said, "same as always." He took his jacket from the piano. He shrugged it on. He nodded once more to the room and walked toward the side door that led out to the staff corridor. Mira caught up with him in the hallway. "Mr. Holloway." He turned. "My father," she said, and could not finish. He waited. He used to say, "You stopped because the world broke you." He hated the world a little for that. Daniel Holloway considered this. He considered it the way a man considers a debt he has carried for 32 years. "Tell him," he said, and then stopped, remembering. He started again. "When you think of him, tell him this. I did not stop because the world broke me. I stopped because I had been told for 15 years that the only thing I was worth was the playing, and one night I discovered I did not believe it anymore. So I went away to find out what else I was. It took me a very long time. And now," Mira whispered, "now I play because I want to. 6 nights a week in a room where no one is listening. I play for myself and for the staff." And once in a while, his eyes lifted to hers for a stranger who turns out to be carrying her father's hand. Mira could not speak. "You may write that," he said, "if you write it kindly. I will write it true. That will do." He turned and walked down the corridor with the easy, unhurried stride of a man who had finally settled an old account with his own life, and the staff door closed behind him. Mira stood in the corridor for a long moment. She walked back into the Ardmore Lounge. The elderly woman in pearls had returned to her banquette and was sipping her drink with both hands. The bartender was crying without trying to hide it. The night manager had put her phone away. The piano stood empty under its half-light, the bench pushed in neatly. Mira sat down at table 9. She opened her notebook. She did not write 300 words. She wrote, at the top of a clean page, the line her father had said to her 1,000 times when she was small, the line she had not understood until tonight. "Certain pianists do not play notes, they play time." Then she wrote underneath it, in handwriting she barely recognized as her own, "The world did not break him. He had stepped out of it." And tonight, at table 9 inches, a hotel lounge no one bothered to review, an old account between a man and a piano, was finally, quietly, fully closed. She closed the notebook. She left a folded bill under her glass for the bartender, who had not charged her for the club soda, and walked out through the lobby into the cold uptown night. Above her, in a small window 6 floors up, a single lamp came on. Mira looked up. A shape moved past the curtain. She could not see who it was, but she knew. She walked home along 86th Street and did not feel the cold. She thought of her father in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, ladling batter onto a pan while a recording from 1989 sang out of the corner speakers. She thought of a young man in a black tailcoat walking off a stage at the Royal Albert never to be heard from again. She thought of the same man, 3 decades older, walking down a hotel corridor with his shoulders no longer hunched. She passed a closed deli, a shuttered florist, a small jazz bar with one yellow lamp still burning in the back. From inside the bar, through the door propped open for a smoker, drifted the sound of someone at a piano playing a tentative blues. Mira slowed. She listened. The pianist inside was clumsy, unsteady, brand new. She smiled. Somewhere in the city, every night, somebody was sitting down at a piano for love. That, she understood now, was the secret Daniel Halloway had spent 32 years learning, and it was the secret she would spend the rest of her life trying to write into a column. She thought of Table 9, and the silence that had held the lounge for 3 seconds, and the elderly woman who had clapped first. By the time she reached her apartment, she had her opening line. Her column ran on Wednesday. It was 1,100 words. Her editor printed it without cutting a single one. The Bellwether's website got 14,000 hits in the first hour. By the end of the week, a small note appeared in the Ardmore Lounge's listings. House pianist Mr. Vance, Tuesday through Sunday, 9 p.m. to midnight. Reservations recommended. The reservations filled for 3 months. The night manager called Mira on Thursday afternoon to thank her. The woman's voice was steady at first, then less so by the 4th sentence. She had worked the Ardmore for 19 years. In all 19 years, she had never had a guest write about the lounge as anything other than a place where music happened by accident. She did not finish the sentence. She thanked Mira a second time and hung up. Mira sat at her kitchen table with the phone in her hand and listened to the small silence on the line after the click, and she thought, in a clean, uncomplicated way, that this was the part of the work she had become a writer for, and the part she most often forgot. Mira went back twice. She sat at table 9 both times. She did not introduce herself again. He did not look at her, except once at the end of the second night, after a tender, weightless arrangement of smile, when he raised his eyes from the keys and inclined his head, just once, in her direction. She inclined hers back. That was all they ever said to each other again. But every Sunday morning, in a small apartment uptown, Mira Halloran made pancakes for one and played a 1,989 recording of the Rachmaninoff Second, and somewhere in the middle of the slow movement she would close her eyes and hear, beneath the orchestra and the old vinyl hiss, the cleanest left hand she had ever known, still telling time the way only one man on earth could tell it. And she would smile, and she would remember, and she would be for that hour, in that kitchen 8 years old again, and her father would be alive again, and the man at the piano would not be lost. He had only, all along, been waiting to be found.